Well, thank you for joining us in another of our series of Safety is Personal, where we are talking to leaders and advocates around the nation about their safety journey. And we all know that safety is personal. It's a lot more than rules and regulations. Safety is about making sure that everyone lives their fullest life. Today, I'm honored to be here with the Honorable Shawn Skelly, who is the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Readiness. And she has been in that job for some time, but she also was in the U.S. Navy for 20 years, and she retired as a commander, and she was in the flight training world. So I can't wait to hear a little bit about that journey. Post her service in the military, she also worked for the Department of Transportation and Department of Defense, where she is now, and she's here to talk to us about her safety journey. So welcome, Honorable Skelly.
Thank you, Lorraine.
Thank you. Certainly that's an interesting journey, and maybe you could just start by sharing a little bit about your journey from the Navy into now some of the civil service jobs.
I wish I knew how it happened, frankly. I retired from the Navy after nearly 20 and a half years. I went into the defense sector immediately after that. I'm very much connected to the work I did. My last tour in the Navy was attached to the Marine Corps, where I helped lead the Marine Corps' fight against the improvised explosive devices, which actually required me to pull upon my entire Navy experience as someone who was a naval flight officer, flew anti-submarine jets, but that meant I had an appreciation for all of the sensors that aircraft could bring to bear, and that allowed me to help the Marine Corps. Also caused me to access my experience as a joint staff officer or a joint qualified officer during that time, and led me into the world of the interagency and high-level staff support, which I find myself in today.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you think about, and certainly explosive devices are a very high-risk environment, and what we ask our women and men in the military services to do is very high risk. How do you think about the fact that readiness and safety go hand in hand?
They're inextricable, not just hand in hand, they're inextricable. Safety is at the core of the department's ability to meet the mission that it has on behalf of the American people. My three distinct hats really come together in a case where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. That's what the Secretary needs from my organization, is understanding of the preparedness of the force for its mission. It's not just how they reported themselves this past month. It's not just what we taught them to do. It's not just whether or not the mishap rate is low for that particular type of operation or that particular type of equipment. It's how do we bring them all together to achieve the mission. That's where my world really comes at the end of the day.
Without safety, there is no mission. I know that there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from the military to the private sector and from the private sector to the military. Have you had a chance to talk with anybody in private sector to share some of those lessons learned?
Not directly yet, but it's actually something we're very intentional about doing in the near future. We've had to get our own enterprise together to understand ourselves well enough to be able to relate to the private sector. As you well know, we're at 3.4 million people, a budget of over $800 billion a year. We're literally a global enterprise. We have nearly 5,000 facilities with tens and tens of thousands of structures of all kinds. We do so many things, and we are continually challenged by the ability to increase our understanding of where we are, what we're doing, how we're doing it, but most importantly, how we're supporting the people that do it to do it safely. Yeah. We have to catch up to the private sector with regard to how we use our data. And that's something that the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary of Defense have been quite clear on in their tenure, is that the power of data is yet to be fully exploited in the department, and we're pursuing that, especially in this realm.
Yes, data can really reveal a lot of your risks ahead of time and be proactive about them. And data is definitely a core lever that a lot of companies are using. I will tell you the scale and scope of what you just described is just immense. And there's probably no private sector company that has quite that responsibility and that far-flung nation of not only making sure the mission's accomplished, but it's done safely. So that's a huge task, ma'am.
There are some private companies that begin to approach us in terms of the number of employees they have. We're pretty different in the form of we have people who are part of our organization in so many different capacities. We have the active duty military folks and then their families. We have the reserve and the guard who are with us for several days, a month and a year. We have the civilian employees who are career. We have contract folks that we count in, that's nearly 3.4 million people. We have so many different categories of people and so many different roles that some of our relationships to what might crassly be called our employees are actually much deeper than that.
Deeper.
We have an incredible duty of care to the vast majority, and everybody who's at work on our installations, we have that duty of care for, but for some people, it's 24/7, 365 around the world.
Yeah, and I think that is different a little bit from the private sector in that the family members and the community and the service person is with you 24/7, as you said, and a lot of the risks that we face in life are not on the job. They're when you leave the gate, when you get in your car and when you go home, and I have seen that the military services are looking at that whole person in their entire experience to make sure that you're giving them the tools to be safe, including their family members.
Very much so.
That's a big task, big task. Well, everyone has a safety story, and that's why we call this series Safety is Personal. And we have been asking leaders to share perhaps their safety journey, what makes safety personal to them, either in your current job, in your life. And I'd love if you could just share a little bit of your safety story, ma'am.
For me, it goes back to being a junior aviator in the Navy. And I will always remember when I really came to understand the risk that I was undertaking, even though it's taught to us day one. When there's doubt, there is no doubt, painted in probably 8-foot letters inside the hangar. Mm-hmm. If you're cocky, you're dead. Never take things for granted. If there's doubt, there is no doubt. If you see something, say something. It's only recently that's been co-opted for security purposes, but all the way in the back, if you see something that's unsafe, as we'd say in aviation, knock it off, and we'll figure it out. But then it's when you actually are confronted with something that has unique, exigent, real threat, an aircraft failure, a dangerous situation, dangerous weather, confronted with something that you didn't immediately plan for, but you've been trained to plan for or react to. The first time that happened for me, the rest of my life has been different because of that. I was prepared for it, but you're not necessarily prepared, it was certainly not 35 years ago, prepared for what it then does to you emotionally and how it then changes your perspective thereafter. And ever since, I've had an appreciation of what it could mean every time you do almost anything. Getting in the car, going home could result in you not getting home. Some of those could be random. Some of those could be the choices that you take upon yourself. You feel late, you feel hurried, you're tired, you're not respecting the conditions, or you didn't understand where you were driving or going to. Maybe it's because I was a jet navigator and mission commander that I take that approach to most things that I do. But that moment where we first got in real trouble and thought we might have to actually eject from an airplane, either before trying to land it or after we tried to land it, and it didn't go well, has informed my professional life as well as my personal life ever since. It informs me today.
It's so important that people can bring their voice in the world of safety, that they can speak up when someone sees something that perhaps their commanding officer even isn't doing right, or that could put others in peril. How do you think about this topic that we talk a lot about called psychological safety when you think about the military specifically and some of the folks that are in the armed forces? To understand, especially when there's such a rank and command and structure, how do you make sure people feel comfortable to bring their voice and to speak up?
To be frank, to be honest, it's only recently, since arriving this job, that I've had it captured for me and presented to me as psychological safety. And as soon as I've read that description, I'm like, oh, I remember exactly when I was confronted with that personally myself. I was a flight instructor, but still relatively junior, just a Navy lieutenant in '03. But I was a fully qualified flight instructor, qualified to do check flights. An airplane had been torn completely apart, put back together, and you had to go make sure that literally everything on it worked. And one day it did. Normally I would do that with other instructors. This time a acquisition-related officer, an engineering duty officer came, one I had never met before, but he was going to fly the airplane for this check flight. So we met for the first time at a brief, went up, flew out there to do this mission check flight profile. And then the weather started changing, and it was not the weather that you needed to have to do this check flight. And we kept doing it, and he was an '06, a Navy captain, And rank was in the cockpit, and there's nothing more dangerous than rank inside of a cockpit or inside of any dangerous evolution where everybody should have the ability to raise their voice. I'd never been confronted with that before to that degree, especially with someone I didn't know. I'd flown in squadrons, and I would be able to look at my commanding officer and say, Skipper, I'm not so sure about this, because there was trust and a relationship built there. There was no relationship between me and this gentleman. So finally it got to one point, and I just looked at him and said, we're below minimums, and I think we need to go home. And he said, you're really going to say that? I said, yes. For the first time I said, sir, in the cockpit, because that rank doesn't go into the cockpit. I said, yes, sir, I am. I think we should go home. He was not happy with that. And we went home. We probably could have stayed and done it and been fine. But we shouldn't have been there, because the rules say you shouldn't. Mm-hmm. And we went home on that. I learned a lot that day too, that I try to carry over in all of the things that I do, especially as a specific name leader like I am, let alone just in a room with people. And I think it takes time to build that trust. But I think the most important thing I learned is that trust has to be explicitly given, and you have to set the expectation that it's going to be permanent and it's going to apply to everyone. People are fallible, fragile. We all bring our lives with us every day. We show up, and in aviation, we're always taught compartmentalize, leave it all at home.
Mm. That's tough to do. That actually doesn't occur.
And so how you get people to bring their toughest, frankest self, you have to build it. Again, it comes to culture. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to accept someone saying, I'm not sure. Why are we doing this? Because when they do that, frankly, it should challenge you positively as a leader and as an organization to say, well, maybe that private, maybe that airman, maybe that lieutenant wasn't properly prepared for this. We didn't set those expectations up front. We didn't make it clear, or we have not revisited the fact that everybody gets to say, knock it off or challenge. What are we doing here? Did we brief this? Are we below minimums or not? And that can apply in a briefing room or in my conference room for that matter.
Because a lot of companies have the same challenge of saying, how do you make sure everybody knows they can hit the stop button? And we want them to hit the stop button, especially in some cases it might call off the mission or it might shut down the production line, but that's what we want. We have a saying that says you can't be safe if you don't feel safe, to connect that psychological piece of safety with the actual physical piece of safety, and you just brought it home so clearly. So thank you for that. Another one I'd like to talk about is when both of you and I were in the military, we might not have had the same openness for everybody to be part of the military. There's been cases throughout our history where we've had certain identities that were prohibited from being part of the armed forces. And you've been a very strong proponent and helpful voice of helping us all understand that a diverse force is a better force, and that everybody can play a role here. And I know that you are a co-founder of the Out in National Security group that is an advocate for LGBTQIA+, so thank you for that. Maybe just a little bit of why you think that diversity is so important to our armed forces and the voice that you've brought to that challenge.
Thank you. Talent doesn't know identity, it doesn't know demographic, it doesn't know place of origin, faith, skin color. It doesn't know any of it. Talent is resident in every human being. Personally, I think a lot of whether or not your talent gets recognized is due to the failing of other humans. That doesn't mean that everybody can do everything, that everybody is inclined to do everything, but there's somebody in every corner, every way you could slice the human condition. There's a rocket scientist in there somewhere. It's whether or not they're discovered, or that they know that they find out that they're a rocket scientist or a brain surgeon or a teacher. Talent is everywhere. It's whether or not it's given the honest chance to come forth and to be nurtured, grown, and recognized. I think we often talk, the greatest asset that we have is our people in the Department of Defense. America is the great melting pot. It's more important than ever that Americans can see themselves in the institutions that are working for them. That's a core part of why we have to be fully representative of who lives in America and who are Americans in this place, and is to be able to get all the talent that we can find. We know scientifically, study-wise, that more diverse organizations, more diverse teams overall tend to make better decisions, tend to understand problems differently. Anybody that's been in an organization or a room that's full of all the same people who have done by and large the same things, you find yourself arriving at an answer pretty quickly. Sometimes that'll work. In some cases, it'll often work. Was it the best one? Was it the fastest one? Was it the most efficient opportunity? Did you compare, contrast all the options that were available to you? You might have gone with the rote solution that you were all taught at some point ago because you all came through the same relative soda straw of training and selection over that time. And we tend to underappreciate what someone's life journey before they hit the military can bring.
It's been an honor to be with you here today, ma'am. This, as I said, is a next version of our Safety is Personal journey. We had the incredible honor to be with the Honorable Shawn Skelly here today to talk about the Defense Department and how safety is not only embedded in everything she does, but in her life personally. So thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.